Welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today I will tell you a story based on the life of Abraham Lincoln. Hope you enjoy listening. Shadow and Light: The Journey of the Solitary Giant. Based on the life of Abraham Lincoln. Chapter 1. Winter at Little Pigeon Creek. The wind howled through the cracks of a dilapidated log cabin in Indiana. It was 1818. Inside, a 9-year-old boy named Abraham stood watching his father hew wood to build a coffin. His mother, Nancy, had just passed away from milk sickness. Americans often speak of Lincoln as a legend born in a log cabin. But few speak of the silence that engulfed that home after his mother's death. It was the first time Abraham tasted the bitterness of loss. The gangly boy, tall and awkward with deep-set eyes that looked far older than his years, had to help his father dig the grave on a snowy hill. In the freezing winter nights that followed, while his father was away seeking a new wife, Abraham and his sister lived like wild children, unkempt and hungry. It was in this extreme solitude that Abraham found his only salvation: books. He devoured anything with words. Neighbors often saw a giant boy wielding an axe with one hand and holding a book with the other, his lips muttering every word. To the local farmers, he was a lazy eccentric. But to Abraham, every page was a ticket out of the poverty and darkness of the wilderness. The things I want to know are in books. My best friend is the man who'll get me a book I ain't read. Chapter 2. The Burden of the National Debt. In 1831, Abraham left his family, drifting on a flatboat down the Mississippi to New Salem, Illinois. He wanted to be a merchant. He pooled his resources to open a general store with a man named William Berry. But fate seemed to mock the young man. Berry was an alcoholic who neglected the business. While Abraham was too honest, he often let customers buy on credit and immersed himself in reading instead of selling. The store went bankrupt. Berry died, leaving Abraham with a staggering debt for that time: $1,100. In that wild frontier, men would often flee to escape their debts. But Abraham chose to stay. He jokingly called it his national debt because it was so large he thought it would take a lifetime to repay. He worked every odd job imaginable: land surveyor, postmaster, rail splitter. He paid back every single cent to his creditors. It was during this destitute period that the people of New Salem began calling him Honest Abe. Not because of his success, but because of how he faced failure. He once walked 3 miles just to return 6 cents he had overcharged a customer. Americans love this story because it defined the man's character. Honor is more important than money. Chapter 3. The Darkness of Melancholy. In 1835, tragedy struck again, more brutal than poverty. Abraham fell in love with Anne Rutledge, a smart and beautiful young woman. She was a rare warm light in his harsh life. But then, typhoid fever took her away. Abraham's collapse this time was total. He fell into a state known then as melancholy, what we today would call clinical depression. Friends had to hide razors and sharp objects from his room, fearing he might take his own life. Abraham would wander the woods, standing dazed by Anne's grave in pouring rain, muttering, "I cannot bear the thought of the rain falling upon that grave." Yet, in the abyss of despair, Abraham found a reason to live: the desire to leave a legacy. He confided in a friend that he was not afraid of death because of hell, but because "I have done nothing to make any human being remember that I have lived." Pain did not kill him, it forged a deep soul capable of understanding human suffering, a quality essential for the great mission that lay ahead. Chapter 4. The Failure in Congress. Abraham pulled himself up, became a lawyer, and entered politics. He married Mary Todd, a union full of storms but also ambition. In 1846, he was elected to the U.S. House of Representatives. It seemed like a peak, but it turned out to be another failure. In Washington, Abraham opposed the Mexican-American War, a stance unpopular with the public at the time. After one lackluster term filled with criticism, he was not renominated. In 1849, he returned to Springfield, Illinois, carrying the label of a failed politician. At 40, Abraham Lincoln thought his political career was over. He returned to law, riding the muddy circuit courts of the West. He became more melancholy, older, But those years of struggle, interacting with all walks of life, from farmers to slaves, helped him see the festering wound of America, slavery. Chapter 5. The Rise of the Giant. In 1854, the Kansas-Nebraska Act was passed, allowing the expansion of slavery. This event was like a lightning bolt that woke the sleeping lion in Abraham. He could no longer remain silent. He returned to the political arena, not for fame, but for a moral principle. He challenged Stephen Douglas, the most powerful senator of the time, in a series of legendary debates. Although Lincoln lost the Senate race in 1858, his words echoed across America. "A house divided against itself cannot stand. I believe this government cannot endure. Permanently half slave and half free." Americans began to take notice of the tall, rumpled man with burning eyes and a voice that rang with truth. From an unknown failure, he became the hope of the young Republican Party. Chapter 6. The Train to the White House and the Burden of Blood. In 1860, Abraham Lincoln was elected president, but there was no celebration. As soon as he won, the southern states seceded. He entered the White House not on a red carpet, but in disguise, sneaking in during the night due to assassination threats. The Civil War erupted. Lincoln became the loneliest man in the world. For 4 years, he carried the weight of millions of soldiers' lives. His face became etched with deep lines of sorrow. He spent sleepless nights pacing the White House corridors. The press vilified him as a dictator, an ignoramus, a guerrilla. Even his own generals looked down on him. Personal tragedy struck again. His beloved son Willie died inside the White House of typhoid fever. Lincoln seemed to break once more. The great president was seen locking his door, sobbing uncontrollably over his son's body. But again, he stood up. He turned private pain into public strength. He signed the Emancipation Proclamation. He held the Union together when everyone advised him to compromise. He understood that this war was not just about territory, but about proving whether a nation conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal could long endure. Chapter 7. The Gettysburg Address and the Finale. In November 1863, on the blood-soaked battlefield of Gettysburg, Lincoln delivered a speech that lasted only 2 minutes. Before him, the keynote speaker had droned on for 2 hours. But Lincoln's 272 words went down in history. His voice did not shout, it was somber like a tolling bell, reminding Americans that soldiers had died so that the nation might have a new birth of freedom. In April 1865, the war ended. The North won. The slaves were freed. Lincoln had achieved the impossible. He had healed a broken nation. On April 14, 1865, he told his wife, Mary, "We have had a hard time of it since we came to Washington, but from now on, we shall be happy." That evening, they went to Ford's Theater. A gunshot rang out. Abraham Lincoln fell the next morning. He departed at the pinnacle of glory, but also at his moment of greatest exhaustion. The funeral train carrying his body from Washington to Springfield traveled nearly 1.700 miles. Millions of Americans, black and white, old and young, stood along the tracks, in rain and sun, bowing their heads to bid farewell to the man they had once mocked and doubted, but had come to love as a father. Epilogue. Lessons from a Giant. The life of Abraham Lincoln is not a fairy tale of innate genius. It is the story of an ordinary man, full of flaws, fears, and haunted by failure, who refused to give up. He failed in business, lost his loved ones, lost elections, and was tormented by depression. But he possessed a weapon stronger than all of that, the ability to rise after every fall. When you feel life is unfair, remember the boy at Little Pigeon Creek. When you are bankrupt or in debt, remember the young man's debt in New Salem. When you feel lonely and desperate, remember the man pacing the halls of the White House during America's darkest nights. Lincoln did not become a giant because he never failed. He became a giant because he never let failure define who he was. And that is the truest American dream. Thank you for listening. Please like and subscribe so you don't miss any meaningful stories.